Hey guys, and welcome to a Betwixt the Books reviews, where today we're reviewing an arc, where we're kind of completing two different challenges on our Betwixt the Books reading challenge, one of which was to read and review an arc on time. Ding! The second of which is part of one of the challenges, which is to read 3 of the Rick Riordan Presents books. So this is one of those books. Today we will be following about The Last Fallen Star by Graci Kim. This is a Korean-inspired fantasy book written by a New Zealand-born Korean descent author. I also follow her on Twitter, and I found out that both her editor and her agent are also of Korean descent, so this book has a lot of Korean influence within it and also around it, helping to support it and prop it up. Super glad that Rick Riordan has gone and found a bunch of really great diverse authors to prop up and say, hey, I write books based on mythology, but I can't really talk about other people's cultural mythology. I'm gonna let them talk about it. So again, super fan of Rick Riordan Presents. If you haven't heard of them and you're looking for some diverse fantasy books, give them a look. But today we're here to review The Last Fallen Star. Here are our thoughts.
So The Last Fallen Star is a middle grade book that follows the story of Riley, a girl whose family, she has a mom, dad, and a sister named Hattie. This will be important later. They are all magical healers. They live in a society where there are different kind of factions. It really gave me almost like Divergent, but with magic vibes of these factions who have different kinds of power, and based on their power, they have different roles within the society. The issue for Riley is that she's adopted. And so unlike her parents and her sister, she has no magic. And she desperately, desperately, desperately wants to be a part of this community, be a healer, and be like her parents and her sister. And so her and her sister, because her sister is like best sister in the world, concoct this plan to do a magic sharing spell that will give Riley half of Hattie's power for a small period of time. Things go poorly from there. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but there was a point when I was reading it and I was like, wow, I don't know what to do with this beginning. And Michaela was like, just skip it. Just skip this part. It begins actually after what I just told you about fails. So that whole entire part includes all the world building, but it doesn't even go off. And then other things begin to happen, which begin to happen in a very bizarre and clunky order. I want to stress that this is not a bad book, but it's a book with some key elements not done all that well. However, if you're looking for a fun, diverse, own voices, fantasy read that has a questy feeling. I love my fantasy with quests, which I mentioned in our, get to know the fantasy reader tag. I love questy fantasy. So it's very cute. There's lots of friends. Riley's sister Hattie is the best. But this for me, just based on some mechanical issues, is a 3-star read, which we will talk about later.
I'm gonna concur with Gretchen. This was also a 3-star read for me for the same reasons. We'll get into those reasons in just a second. But for overall impressions, that's pretty much it. Where the world is interesting, the idea that she has of this, again, somewhat divergent like society but with magic, was very like captivating to me as an idea. I also personally enjoy Korean culture in a lot of ways. I started listening to K-pop in college and then got into Korean literature and other things, so I can talk a little bit about that. Obviously I am not Korean, so I can't talk from like an own voice's perspective, but I can maybe give a little bit extra info in that area as someone who like maybe knows more than the general American about some Korean cultural stuff. But there were multiple times throughout the book when like I messaged Gretchen or Gretchen messaged me and we were like, this wasn't done exactly as well as it could have been. And it is helpful to say that this is a debut book, and it felt like a debut book. And it was interesting. There were things that were done really well. There were also things that weren't done as well, and that's sort of why we both landed on 3 stars. Not bad, not good. It's a book, and if it has the things that you're looking for, by all means, pick it up. It's not going to be a terrible experience. It just may not be your best book of the year.
This book is for sure a debut. And I mean, it's the kind of debut where I'm interested in reading the next book. I should say that up front, because the other things that we're going to have to say are going to be a little bit more critical. But it is the kind of debut where you know it's a debut, but you have faith that the next book or books in the series will get better. We can't prove that, they're not out yet. This book's not out yet. I have faith. But anyway, I want to go back to what I was saying about the beginning, because there is this kind of like front episode kind of tacked on to the beginning of the book before it really begins to get going. And granted, this thing does cause a revelation that sets off the rest of the book, but it really felt like, all right, you're setting me up for this story, and then this is the story that does not happen because other things happen, which can be fun, but can also be kind of annoying if done incorrectly. But the bigger issue that I had with the beginning is that I can't remember the last time that I read a middle grade book. And so I was reading it and I was like, wow, this feels really, really young. And like it's really, really, going for the young demographic. And then I felt bad because I was like, well, it's because I've been reading a lot of adult and YA recently, and that's an unfair thing to say about this book. So I was like, just holding it in. And then eventually I texted Michaela and I was like, does this book feel really young to you, even for middle grade? And have a slightly, as Michaela then said, yes, a hello fellow kids vibe. There are a lot of pop culture references that just seem to be like shoehorned in there. And then, for example, one of the characters mentions that they play Fortnite a lot. Except they don't say Fortnite, they say Fortnite Battle Royale. I do not know a single kid at the library at which I work who calls it Fortnite Battle Royale. They just call it Fortnite. So it's just like little things like that, and how many of them they were, and just the overall tone where as like, this is definitely a younger middle grade feeling book. It's not a bad thing, but just call it Fortnite. Just call it Fortnite. I'm not going to go through the rest of the examples. So just call it Fortnite as an annoying thing that happens throughout the entire book.
Along similar lines, there were points where Korean words were romanized to be used in this book. For instance, the word that they used for non-magic folk here is saram, which is the Korean word for people. That just means people, like you would say mingguk saram for I'm an American person, or I'm from America, mingguk saram. So just saram being people, that makes sense, that works there. But then there would be times where a Korean word would be romanized, for instance with kimchi, where it was pronounced, or romanized as gimchi, Gimchi, where I feel like kimchi, Kimchi, is pretty prevalent and known to most Americans. Saram is not going to be known to most Americans, they're just going to think that's a word. But kimchi, on the other hand, people know what that is. They have heard of kimchi. It's relatively well known. And so romanizing it weird like that was an interesting choice. Now, again, we had an advanced reader copy. That might be something that changes before the final printing. It may not. I just wanted to say that, sometimes those things came up. And there is, at the back of the book, a glossary of, how to pronounce these words. And I'll say that, kimchi is probably closer to how you would pronounce it in Korean. Kimchi. It's a little bit harder of a K sound than kimchi in the American way of saying it. But when you look at it and you're like, I already kind of know an English version of that, why wouldn't you just use the English version instead of a weird romanization of it? That's just another small weird editing thing that might change. It might not be in the final book. We had an advanced reader copy. It may be. I just wanted to mention that. And then there were also things where each of the clans, the magic clans, were named after an animal. And one of the clans is the Horangi clan, or the Mountain Tiger clan. And for like the normal American reader, that probably sounds really cool. Horangi, like it just sounds really cool. But as someone who knows what that means in Korean, and like you can kind of deduce what that means because they talk about them being tigers or being based off of the Mountain Tiger goddess. You can kind of deduce that they're the Tigers. It just feels like a high school sports team. Like, we're gonna go fight the Tigers today. And maybe that's just because my high school was the Tigers. It just felt a little weird. Maybe no one would notice, especially kids. This is a middle grade book. They might not notice, they might not care, but it was something that I noticed and kind of felt weird.
I am not a child, but I also don't speak Korean. So I did not know what any of those words meant until Michaela told me, because I didn't look at the glossary in the back, because I was like, I'm reading the book, and I didn't notice any of these things. I was just like, these are cool sounding words that are Korean, and they are tigers. Cool. So again, it didn't bug me, because I don't speak Korean. So do with that what you will. The thing that did bug me, though, is that, like I said earlier, this plot is a little bit clunky and it's questy. And it's questy in the sense that there's a couple different kinds of quest plots, right? And there's ones where one quest leads naturally to another quest, and like, you know, you see the trajectory as the plot goes on, and they build off of each other, and they feel like a natural linear progression for the story. There are also quest plots where most of them feel like side quests that you might not do, like say in a video game, the kind of side plot you only play after you've completed the main plot because they feel kind of tangential. But this character's like, no, we're gonna do the weird side quest first. And you're like, wait, why are we here? Or they like, she would say no to a quest and then go off and try to continue the quest and find out that she actually had to say, yeah. It just didn't flow well. Maybe that's the easiest way to say this. And then I'm just kind of like, but why did that happen? And did this, and then, but I don't, and especially with the ending, which I am not at all going to talk about, promises. But Michaela and I both texted each other, what? Did that just, because, And again, it's not bad. I want to stress that it's not bad. But it's just that kind of thing where you finish it and you go, huh? I like a very particular quest plot. I like it to make sense. I like it to feel linear and built up and not this. So, like I said, this is the kind of thing where in a debut book, you can smooth that kind of thing out later. So I have faith after this book that if the second book follows a similar questy style plotline, that it can be smoothed out, but it was not smooth here.
To give some positives, because we were a bit critical there, and some people might be saying, well, why would you read it now? The world building here, and I mentioned this in my overall thing, is very good. We enjoyed that element of it. The idea of those, different magical clans that have a very particular type of magic. There's the medical witches that do that sort of thing. There's protector witches that are quite strong. There's witches that can do, glamour, basically, and make themselves beautiful or change the way that other people look. All of those things make sense, and they tie into Korean culture or the Korean world in general. They're also linked with animals that give you a little bit of Korean language. The general idea of their sort of religion or the basis of their magic comes from a multi-pantheon of goddesses, which is interesting. They're all women, which I appreciated. There was discussions of what happens after you die in this world, where there are certain types of ghosts, but also an afterlife. There was discussions of certain magical creatures that exist based on Korean lore. All of these things are very interesting to read about. They're different, and they're coming from the perspective of a person who's from that culture, which I always appreciated. So yes, the plot was very questy and a little clunky, but the world building elements were solid. And if you're a young kid going into this, you might not care so much about that plot issue that we talked about, because you just care about the fun and the interesting stuff. So again, young readers might not notice that. We're adults who are reading this who don't read middle grade always, so keep that in mind, that, like, again, this is a book aimed at children, and generally elementary to middle school age children, like 7 to 12-ish. So yeah, they'll really enjoy this sort of thing. There's elements of, like, Korean pop culture that they might recognize. Like, I know she name dropped BTS, which is a big thing with young people right now. She also name dropped Akmu, which is a band that I really like, and I'm not sure that they're as popular, like, definitely not as popular as BTS, but like a cool indie-er K-pop group. If you're interested, that's mentioned in there as well. It's cool. So there's those elements that I think that were done quite well there.
For one last positive-ish thing, the heart of this story really, really is the characters. And I started out by talking about Riley and Hattie, the sisters who touch off this entire story, and their relationship is absolutely fantastic. But as the story progresses, Riley gains more and more friends who have really interesting backstories of their own. They have really interesting histories of their own and really interesting personalities. And so while this story has some interesting plot things, some fun world building, it really does have characters that shine all the way through. And important for a middle grade story, it also has competent adults. I think that this is very key. There is a thing in younger literature where they say that kids only will care about like a small group of mainish characters, and that oftentimes the adults are sidelined. Neither of these things are true for this book. They're all interesting, they're all competent, and while the larger round of cast does mean that some character development feels slightly unearned because they're juggling so many characters, it just makes a really, really fun group, family-oriented, family and friends, tight nuclear and extended unit. And that was just really nice and fun, and not something that, you know, you always see in even like young adult literature, right? The parents are always gone unless there's an evil stepmother somewhere. So that was nice for my feelings, my happy, happy feelings. So again, this is not a bad book. It is a solid 3-star book with extreme potential. And that, I think, is the key. There are debut novels that I can rate a 3 that I will not read the next book in, because I'm like, this is fine, but I want to continue this series. I fell in love with these characters and I fell in love with the world. Plot is hard, guys, and can be fixed. So even if our review has seemed a little bit critical, please do go either get this book, get it from your library, and enjoy, have some fun. And also enjoy, as I am, this review, like Michaela said, ticking off 2 of our challenges and just in general being done on time. So lots of patting on the back for this one, because the bar for Betwixt the Books content being on time is real low. So thanks so much for hanging out with us, guys, and we have plans for even more content coming down the line, so we'll see you then. Thanks, guys. Bye.